We got lots of stuff on the board to talk about today before we do one practice. We'll just do one practice passage today and then we'll move on from reading. Thing about reading is the more you know about it, the better equipped you are to score well on it. We know that it's all about timing. We've talked about strategy, whether or not you're going to read all four passages or if you're going to read three passages. Let me give you a final caution about that just three passage method. That is just to get you to benchmark. It takes 21 correct answers to get to benchmark. And so if you're only answering 30 questions carefully, that means you have to do 30 questions really well to get benchmark, but it gives you some extra time. It gives you about 11 minutes per passage as opposed to 8 minutes and 45 seconds. Use that strategy very carefully. Don't do it if you're trying to get above benchmark. If you need above a 20, you're going to have to read all four passages. Most of you in this classroom are already at or above benchmark, so it probably means you're going to have to read all four passages. You need to just get that through your mind that I've got to find a way to persevere and get through those four passages in the amount of time that we've got. So, if you know the passages, it helps you. So let's look at what I've got on the board. You can write this down or you can take a picture of it after we talk through it. Let's begin with passage 1. These passages will always be in this order. They will always be these types of passages. Passage 1 is always literary narrative. That means it's going to be something like a memoir, personal essay, autobiography. It's the passage where you have two viewpoints, like a passage A, passage B, and you have to understand the author's opinion. When you read a passage 1, you want to read for tone and you want to keep track of the people, the characters, as it were, and their opinions. So when I read a passage 1 and I come across someone's name, I circle that person's name. And then in the margin or on a piece of scrap paper, I write down something about that character as I find out more about them. So I want to know who the people are, who the characters are, and what their opinion is of certain topics that they're talking about. If you can figure that out, then you're going to be equipped to answer the questions. The questions for passage 1 will be about main idea, the tone, the narrator's intent, or their opinions. Passage 2 is always going to be a social science passage. It'll be something from the area of psychology, that's individual mental health, sociology, that's overall societal health, education and history, something in the social sciences. You need to be able to paraphrase the information that's in a social science passage. You will be asked questions like, with what point would the author agree? And so you've got to understand what's the author's position in this. Passage 3 is always a humanities passage. It'll be about arts, literature, drama, theater, religion, something that's considered arts and humanities. Again, they're going to be more likely to ask you questions about what's the author's point of view, what's the author's opinion about this particular topic. Passage 4 is the natural science. This is the pure sciences passage. It's going to be about biology, chemistry, physics, medicine, technology, something in the pure sciences. And you'll get questions like, which of the following statements is supported by the passage? Typically, students say passage 4 is their better passage. You may have found that to be the case when we work through all of those passages. You can work them out of order. So if you know your strongest passage is passage 3, then you might want to begin with passage 3. And if you know your weakest passage is passage 1, maybe that's the one you want to run out of time on. Even though you're not burning a passage, you're going to try to read all 4, but you would want to run out of time on the passage that you're less likely to get many questions correct on anyway. If you have to guess, just guess the same letter consistently. Now, some advice. My advice is the tone of the passage has to match the tone of the correct answer. So if in the passage the author's opinion is very favorable of the topic, and then you've got 3 choices that are very critical of the topic, then you know you can eliminate those 3 choices and pick the one answer that has a favorable tone toward the topic. So if you're really astute at picking up on tone as you read, use that to your advantage to eliminate wrong answers. The tone has to match in the correct answer. Some traps to avoid. Some of the choices will be distorted. In other words, it will twist details from the passage so they're no longer true. So when you read it, you'll recognize it as something that was talked about in the passage, but if it doesn't treat it accurately, it cannot be the right answer. So if you read a statement and say, no, no, that's not exactly what the passage said, mark it off, it's not a right answer. Misuse details. It can be a true statement, not distorted from the passage, but it doesn't answer that particular question. To me, that's a tricky distractor because you know it's true, you know it's in the passage, but it doesn't answer the question. So don't fall for that trap. Watch for questions that are out of scope. In other words, choices that include information not in the passage. It's something outside the passage that sounds like it's true. You may even know it to be true, but if it's not in the passage, it's not going to be a correct answer. Watch out for things that are too extreme. If it uses the word always, never, best, and worst, you know that that's probably not the right answer, right? Because things are rarely that cut and dry. They're usually more shades of gray and more nuanced than that. So it's just too extreme to represent the author's true opinion. And be aware of contradictions. So if a choice is the opposite of what the passage states, it's not going to be the right answer. So if you know to look out for these, you can eliminate wrong answers. And if you know to look for tone, you can eliminate wrong answers. So once you've eliminated wrong answers, it makes it easier to pick the right answer. You've got to get to 21 correct answers out of 40 to be at benchmark. Questions about strategy. It's all about time. We're going to work one passage today and then we'll stop because I feel like we can get really burnt out in reading because you just need to come in fresh and ready on Tuesday to know that you're going to sit down and read through all 4 passages. We're just going to do 10 questions today, yes. So let's do passage 1. So just do questions 1 through 10 and then you can stop. I'm going to put the timer on the board so you can kind of gauge yourself. We'll go over correct answers and then when we finish reading, we're going to switch back to math and talk about math. All right? You may begin passage 1. All right, time's up for that passage. Just gotta look at your process and look at the answers. Let me tell you something that I do as part of my process when I take a reading test. Everybody see that little blurb right under where it says passage? I always read that. It doesn't waste a whole lot of time. It takes me about 30 seconds, but it establishes a context for me. I do not read the questions first. I always read the passage first because I want to understand who the characters are, who the people are, and what their opinions are before I look at the questions. But when I read that first little excerpt, it told me two key details. That one of these is a passage about a piano and the other is a passage about a violin. So I knew going into the passages what I was going to be reading about. So I suggest you read the little blurb at the top just so it sets a context for you. To me, that's more valuable than reading the questions first. Okay, as I read, I circled names, and I found that in passage A, there were two people. You've got the name of the artist, Luke, Luc, and the narrator. It's in first person point of view, so I circled I, and that's the narrator. And so I try to determine what's the narrator's opinion of that author. How would you characterize the narrator's opinion of the artist, Luke? Very favorable, right? Admirable, even. It's a sense of admiration. And talks about how Luke's view of playing piano and caring for the piano, and that passage is all about how one treats a musical instrument. All right, and then passage B, I found that there were three characters. You've got two artists that are contrasted to one another, and you've got the first person narrator. So I circled Mark and Joseph, and so then when you get down to paragraph 3, for example, it contrasts those two. And then there's a shift where the author, the narrator, begins talking about their own personal relationship with the violin. This passage was less about how you treat the violin or the instrument and more about how the instrument has a personality of its own. So if you walked away from those two passages and understood that amount, you were well equipped to answer the questions. Here are the answers to the questions. Number 1, you should have marked D. The parenthetical information indicates some of Luke's firm beliefs about piano care. It was the part about humidity. 2, you should have marked F. It's better to live a full and imperfect life than not participate because something might go wrong. In other words, it's okay if the piano gets damaged as long as you are playing it. 3, the phrase bit into. So it was talking about drinks spilled and stains bit into the shiny finishes. So you know that means messing it up. And the word that means messing it up is C, marred. If you mar something, you mess it up. What did you pick, Lance?
I'll pick B.
Yeah. No, it's more about messing it up. So marred's the better choice.
Is that saying this?
Yes. Number 4, this is about passage B. It says in the third paragraph, the author shifts. I kind of noticed that. It shifted from talking about the two artists to talking about his own relationship. So, J, discussing the connections between other musicians and their instruments. 5, passage B. Correct answer is D, an opinion that the author asserts but does not explain. It never mentions what other artwork that this person does. So it makes an assertion but then never backs it up. 6, you should have answered J. His violin doesn't make sounds by itself. 7 is B, makes him adjust to its whims. And then the last 3 questions are about both passages. Number 8 is H. Passage B is more directly focused on interdependence between musicians and instrument. 9 is about the contrast of the two passages. The correct answer is B. Passage B is described as having an active personality of its own. The instrument has its own personality. I walked away from that passage knowing the answer to that question. And then number 10, which of the following assertions about instruments is most strongly supported by details provided in both of the passages? So this is a comparison question, and it is F. Familiarity with your instrument is an important part of the joy of playing music. One other thing about reading before we move on, there are 5 different types of questions that you will encounter, and here's kind of a percentage of breakdown how frequently they show up. Big picture questions are about main idea. Detail questions are about little specific things that are directly stated in the passage itself. So detail questions are directly stated. Make sure that it's not distorted or misused, but it's exactly as it is in the passage. Vocabulary and context, that was the question we had for marred, bit into. Development and function, in other words, why is this detail here? How does it function? And then an inference question means that it's not directly stated. You have to make an inference about it. Notice which one is used most frequently. Drilling down and finding specific details is the skill that you need to be able to do very quickly. And 45% of the questions are going to be like that. Probably vocabulary and context is the easiest because it has a line reference, but it's the least frequently used question. And then the next frequently used question would be development and function, trying to make an assumption about why things are put together the way they are. All of that's just information. It's not the skill itself, but the more information you have, the better equipped you are to get the right answer. It's all about practicing the skill. It would not be a bad idea between now and Tuesday to take one of these other passages and give yourself 8 minutes and 45 seconds and answer the questions. If you do that, come back to me and I will check your answers if that will help you.